Scale Computing itself is a US-based company, so we are located in Indianapolis. Our European headquarter is based in the Netherlands. And maybe you know already, we are creating a hyperconverged solution and focusing here on one hand into small and mid-market customers, on the other hand in distributed enterprise or edge computing customers, which means whenever you need to leave your, let's say, traditional data center, it's always a good idea talking about scale computing and have a look on that. So, and what we want to do, and that's however part of kind of our DNA, we want to make things easy. We are reducing the complexity, which you may know from traditional IT infrastructure solutions so far. And that we're not doing completely alone. So our part is providing the software. We are working together with a couple of technology partners. Our hardware partners are Lenovo and Intel. Public cloud partners, Google. Software partner are Acronis, Parallels, Leostream. That's not necessarily mean that you can only go with these guys, except from the hardware side. But from a software side, you're quite flexible, but there's a big difference. We do have a support department, which also take care of Acronis, Parallels, Leostream, as well about your hardware issues when maybe there is a disk broken. You just need to dial one number, calling directly to Scale Computing, and sorry, and we will take care of everything. Our support, there's also a pretty easy model. There is only available 24/7, 365 for each and everybody. I think our support is doing quite well, as we do have, with 91 NPS Net Promoter Score, from what I know, the highest in the HCI industry. Each and every vendor presentation need this type of slide in there. That means there is an overview about our customers. There are customers all over the world for sure. These are more European-based slide here. So we are working, for example, with Northern Marine, running there on their ships, running on the Zillertaler Gletscherbahn, so running there on top of the mountain, nearly 3,000 meters high. There is a scale cluster located. I have personally seen them and however was take part by the initialization and installation of that cluster. But we are working also with customers like Ahold Delhaize. Ahold Delhaize is a very big retailer in the Benelux area. There we are running on, or they run with us more than 800 stores in the meanwhile with scale computing. At the end, all our customers are reporting more or less the same. So they have a much better availability. They don't have so much trouble around in their IT infrastructure space. They save a lot of time in administration of the solution, and they also save money then. And if you compare Scale HG3 in the market with other hyperconverged solution, you will easily find out that we provide the lowest TCO in the HCI market. In one of the next slides, we will see the difference of the architecture, which shows us how the difference is. And that means we can easily create a edge-based solution, so we can provide the smallest HCI cluster in the world. So whenever you have customers where there's not that much IT people there, it's quite a good idea to talk about that. And for you as a partner, it's, I think, very interesting to know that you are protected. So there will be only one scale HD3 quote for a customer project. For sure, you need to register the project in our partner portal, but there we have our protection mechanism. And personally, I think the margin situation in a scale HD3 project is way higher than you usually have in, for example, traditional VMware projects. Let's talk what we are doing before we switch into the live demo. We are doing, I call it likely real hyperconvergence, which means we're combining server, storage, and virtualization into one product and one solution. That's called Scale HD3. Pretty sure you are aware of that. So that's you're working on or you're working with a traditional VMware environment, virtualization layer, a storage network, storage underneath, could be more, could be less, but showing the complexity. So for example, if you want to do a VMware upgrade, first thing you need to do is start reading HCL lists. You need to know which device is running on which firmware or which driver version. You need to update drivers first, then firmwares, before you really can start the VMware update, for example. And hyperconvergence wants to make things easier. And that's gonna happen, but there's a big question. The question is, how is that gonna happen and how much you need to, let's say, pay for it? On the left-hand side, you see how, let's say, normally hyperconverged solutions are built. There is a virtual machine running on top of a hypervisor, sitting in the hypervisor's file system, using and utilizing the local resources, sharing to itself and the other nodes through the network, basically. For sure, that's working, but that takes a lot of resources to get these HCI magic up and running. So Nutanix is more or less doing best there, and they're using at least 24 gig of memory and 4 physical cores per node just for the HCI getting up and running. In other words, if you have a Word document and you want to change a comma into a semicolon, for example, you need to go through 36 steps. And if you compare that to our integrated hypervisor model, that's just 12 steps. That means it's quicker, it's faster, you have more performance, you have a way lower latency. And there's also one big difference. We are using a so-called distributed block-based file system, which allows our virtual machines having direct block access, and that results into the possibility to create 5,000 snapshots per virtual machine without any performance issue. And we're using not more in maximum, so not more than 4 gig of RAM per node. In other words, you get way more performance out of a scale system. You can run much more virtual machine on the same scale system and compare the sizing one-to-one to other solutions, which means the density of virtual machines are higher. Or you don't need to buy that much big hardware boxes than with scale HD3. And as I said in the earlier, we have seen our architectural differences. We are able to create the smallest HCI cluster in the world. For sure, we do have a couple of features in there, so I don't think that we're missing anything. Basically, simplicity is key here. So you just need an HTML5 browser to manage the whole scale HD3 environment. Our appliances are pre-configured and a deployment takes just a couple of minutes. I'm pretty sure it will take more time to rack and stack your scale cluster than the installation will take. We do have self-healing, we do have high availability, we do have backup, we do have replication, we can create disaster recovery scenarios, we can easily create that as a service. We have deduplication, we have auto-tiering. All these nice things are included into our solution. And by the way, there are no licenses as we are a complete stack. So there's no, there's no replication license needed. So all the features we do have are always included. And for sure, we know about our solutions on our hardware. So we are monitoring the systems, and we have an, let's say, integrated one-click upgrade scenario. That means we take care also of, for example, if your system needs a BIOS update or a network card needs a firmware update, that's completely included in a update when you do an update of scale HG3. And for sure there is scalability, otherwise I think we should choose another name so we can run on single nodes or with single nodes, and we can mix and match. That means, for example, you start with a 3-node cluster, and after 2 years your customers is getting a new database system which needs much more resources you have right now. You can add another node which has a different type of CPU, for coming from a different CPU generation, having different amount of storage, different amount of memory in it, and it runs in the same cluster. Or you only need to grow in storage. It's also not a problem. You can easily add a storage only node. And these are the deployment options. So normally we're starting with a central cluster, which is named here central data center. A cluster with 3 nodes, could be more for sure. You can replicate. Replication is always bidirectional, so you can replicate to a cluster or from a cluster to a backup node or to a single disaster recovery node. You can also create your own cloud. So we have a couple of partners around which create kind of a partner cloud where, for example, customers running on a single node, there's replication done and everything is managed by just a single pane of glass, just one browser. So last slide before we switch into the live demo, a short portfolio overview. As I said, starting with the smallest HEI cluster in the world, the HE150 series. It's a very powerful but very small solution. So there is an NVMe inside. So we can easily run 20, 25 virtual machines on an HE150 cluster. We go over to the HE500 series, which is a single socket system. You can configure as an all flash, all spinning, or hybrid system. Same as the HE1200 and 5000 series. Here you can add 2 sockets. You can add GPUs, for example, for VDI workloads or for AI workloads, for example. And the HE3000 series is an NVMe-based system where you need, for example, a very powerful storage, very huge storage performance for very nice pricing at the end. And last but not least, the HE3 Cloud Unity, so a scale instance powered in the Google Cloud. Questions so far from your side, from, let's say, from the theoretical part? I also haven't seen any questions in the chat, so let me quickly share my screen, and I opened just a Google Chrome browser and I'm now logging into a scale cluster. This scale cluster I'm using, it's located in the Netherlands. It's owned by William. William, thank you very much that I'm allowed to use your cluster for these demos. So, and if you see the cluster here, we do have a cluster based on 3 nodes. You see on top the IP addresses. So you can log in to each and every IP address of your cluster. There's no primary node, secondary node. There's no system center virtual machine manager. There's no virtual center or whatever, which is an not high availability management tool. So we have integrated the management into the cluster, and that means it's on each and every node available. So on top of the 3 nodes, you see our so-called heads-up display, where you can see the CPU, memory, disk, IOPS, and latency overview. Can click on disk. There you see the utilization, how much storage is consumed. At efficiency, we get a view on how good our deduplication mechanism is working here. So we can see in this cluster, we are saving 3.8 terabytes of storage just through our deduplication mechanism. And last but not least, here in the storage details, we see what provisioning is, or how thin provisioning is working here. So you see how much is provisioned and what is, let's say, a saving through thin provisioning. We are working here on a hybrid cluster because we have some SAS disks and some SSDs in here. By the way, this cluster is right now 11 years old. So that's not the fastest anymore, but we can add here, as I said earlier, with our mix and match feature, a completely new node and just add it to the cluster, because this cluster is working on the latest version, which you can see next to our nice logo under the name. On the right-hand side, you see some overviews from if there are any warnings, and so you can click on it, and there we will jump directly into the conditions with this next to our cluster log. In the cluster log, you see what happens in your cluster, which user did what. So going further in the control center, we do have the control section where we can shut down a cluster. If we shut down the cluster, all the virtual machines will be shut down, and when you restart the cluster, they're coming back in the same way you shut it down. That means all your virtual machines will be online again, which were online before, and all the virtual machines which are switched off will be switched off still. In the media part, you can upload some ISO files which you want to add to your virtual machines. By the way, I will talk about virtual machines just in a few moments. In my presentation, I talked about replication. So we do have here 2 replication systems or clusters connected to this cluster. There's one in the cloud and one HE150 cluster. By the way, the HE150 cluster, which is located at Williams House, is hosting a VDI infrastructure. If I click on that, I will redirect it on the UI or on the management interface of this cluster or the cloud interface. However, I'm not in the correct network. I will get an error message, but if I would connect it to the correct network, I can easily switch to the other clusters. Maybe there will be sometimes the need for support, then you talk to our support engineers. Let's show it first. So in the support section here, you get a link for the customer community and the partner community, and a link to the support page where you can log in these communities as well, can send an email, can start chatting, and you get also here the phone numbers to talk directly to the scale computing support. So the Polish number will appear. I think in a couple of weeks, I know that my colleagues are already working on having also a localized Polish number, just for you to know. Can directly talk now to the scale computing support colleagues, and that will happen that they say, okay, let's open a tunnel. You will type in the tunnel ID you will given by the support colleagues. By the way, all our support colleagues are scale computing employees, so that's not an offshore support, that's not support in India or whatever. You will get here a code of the day, type it in, you can open a connection. When the connection is open, the colleagues can log in and do whatever they need to do, find out what's going on, and they will solve your problems from there. And if they come to a solution, then they will say, okay, thank you very much. You can close the connection. The connection is just an outbound connection, so there's no need to have some open ports on your firewall for an inbound connection. Going over to the scheduler. So I mentioned earlier that we can do up to 5,000 snapshots per virtual machine. So my virtual machine we're using, or which I'm using for these demos, is using the scheduler. It's named Gold. You can see I'm doing a snapshot every hour and save the snapshots for 6 hours locally and 1 day on my replication target. And I do additionally a snapshot every day, store it locally 3 days, remote side 2 weeks. And I do a weekly snapshot and store it 5 weeks, remotely 26 weeks. So I save my snapshot on the remote side for half a year. Can also, for example, do a yearly snapshot also, or a monthly, do it every month on the first, for example, and keep it for 52 weeks. And maybe that I could add also keeping it 10 years, for example, so I can play around with that. I wouldn't save it because we don't have enough storage to save snapshots for 10 years on the remote side, but you're able to do that. Going over to the settings, there you can have the traditional settings. Let's say, how's the name of the cluster, DNS servers. You can here configure the OpenID Connect provider if you want to go authentication through your Active Directory or Azure AD or many other, for example, two-factor authentication systems. And then you can go to the user management where you can add users. If you have configured Active Directory, you can use them. Otherwise, can do it manually. There are 2 roles predefined, the read-only and administrator role. And you can also customize your roles. For example, create a user who's only allowed to create virtual machines and changing the power controls, but not allowed to delete virtual machines. We also have, and that's from my point of view quite nice having that, there is a API, so where you can do a lot of things managing the cluster through scripts. For example, your UPS needs to shut down the cluster, you can do that. Or if you have a GPU system, you can add a GPU profile to a virtual machine and remount it, for example, on depending on working hours or whatever. So you can do whatever like. Going through that in detail would not fit to the presentation here, so that takes us, let's say, another one. If you're interested in going through the REST API more in detail, let us know. Can easily create another meeting for that. Can you add a certificate if you like, and the most important thing, as I mentioned earlier as well, is our update mechanism. So if there is an update, we will see next to the version number update available. As we are right now running on the latest version, we don't see anything. But If an update is there, you will see here in the update section a short description of the update, a link to the long description of the update, and a button update. If you click on update, that means there's a question right now incoming. Could you please comment how migrate existing systems, VMware physical to scale? I will do that just in a few moments because I will just finishing updates and then I will talk about virtual machines. And there's the point where I explain how you can migrate to scale, because I know that we need to do that. Just a second, please. Talking about updates, there is the button update, which I said the clicking on the button will free up the first node. All the virtual machines will be moved to the other nodes. The node will be checked, the node will be updated, and as I said earlier, we will do a BIOS update. We will update a firmware update of the network card or of any controller which is needed, is coming directly with this one click. The node is coming back, the virtual machines are moved back, and that will happen with the next one and the next one until your cluster is completely updated. So that's basically the settings part of a scale cluster. And let's first power on a virtual machine. That's my virtual machine. Not sure why I switched it off. Anyway, so let's go to your questions about how to get virtual machines. First, you can create a new virtual machine like you can do on your email program, clicking on the plus button, typing a name of a virtual machine, a description if you like, and what is really important are tags. So you can use a couple of tags and you can choose a operating system, Windows or other. You can use drivers. Here you can choose between performance and compatible. If you choose performance, we will emulate a virtual IO disk and network device. When you're choosing compatible, you will use a Intel E1000 network card and an IDE disk. Boot type can be BIOS, can be UEFI. You can choose between, or you can fill in how many CPUs, memory, and drive, or your drives, for example. And you can also choose where you come. Boot from, just click on this one, say create. If you create the virtual machine, it takes a couple of seconds. The virtual machine is now ready and we can start it. If we do that right now, we will see how a Windows server will be deployed. I think that's very boring. Use the tsvm01 as a template and do a quick clone. And we want to generate a new MAC address and clone it. If that's our template, which is prepared, then we have in a 10 to 15 seconds a new virtual machine. When we click now on the power button, we have an already installed Windows Server system. But there are other ways to import virtual machines. For example, there's next to the plus button our import button. So if your VMware virtual machine or Hyper-V, or let's say any other virtual machine is available on a share, we can easily import these virtual machines into a Scale HE3 cluster. That may take time because your virtual machine is offline during this import process. We do have an additional tool which you also can use, that the tool is called HE3 Move, which you also can use for importing physical systems or whatever. So there's an agent installed on your source. There's also an agent installed on your destination. There is a replication. You can monitor the replication in the HE3 Move console. And there also will find a button which means failover. That means your source will be shut down and the destination will be rebooted again, and it comes up with the same IP address, the same host name, and everything the same as your source, let's say. So going back to the virtual machines, let's talk about the network first. If your virtual machine needs to be in a separate VLAN, for example, let's take 125, can easily update. And now my virtual machine is placed in that VLAN. So there's no need for me to create a virtual switch or whatever thing. So that will take place, let's say, under the hood. I have discussed about snapshots. Oh, you have only 16 left. However, but they are active, and that's an active virtual machine. Let's switch on the desktop. Let me shortly log in on my desktop. It's wrong. So here I do have very important data on my desktop. You can see. And however, I'm always a bit nervous when I'm doing demonstration. I don't know why. Now I put it into the recycling bin, and I emptied also the recycling bin. Now you can say, okay, not a problem at all. Let's go back to the snapshots and revert from a snapshot. But in the meanwhile, we have another important data on the system, and we don't want to lose it. But now going back to snapshots again, choosing one. There was a question. Let me shortly check the question. How can this solution help with backup? Just a second. I'm right now explaining how we can, out of the box, a file level restore backup. So I'm choosing my old snapshot, mounting it on the same virtual machine I'm working on. Then I go to the File Explorer, see, oh, there's a new disk. It's called D. Going to the right folder. Where is it? Desktop. There's my file, and I'm copying back on the origin location. And now I did easily a file level restore. So we do have integrated these type of things. Additionally, you can do backup without any third-party tool, just with scale replication. That means our replication is snapshot based, and we can store, as I showed you earlier when I talked about the scheduler, how we can do snapshots and replication, which is when you replicate your virtual machines to a replication system. That's not necessarily be a cluster. It can just be a backup or replication target system. And you can have, if you need some additional backup services like single mail restore, single item restore in Active Directory or things like that, then, or if you want to store your backups on a tape device or so, then you need a third-party device. You can use Acronis, for example, because we do have a relationship with them and we take care of the support. There is another one, let's say in the works, which will be officially launched the beginning of next year. That's maybe you know them. That's Storeware, because they are also a Polish company. There's also an integration. We are, let's say, right now working on how things are going from a sales side of view. But as far as I know, if you're interested in getting storeware together with Scale HG3, feel free to talk to the guys from Connect. Okay, we did the file level restore, going back to the virtual machines, seeing now there's another disk. This one we can delete because we don't need them anymore. That was just the amount of the snapshots. I didn't delete my snapshot device. Going back to the other disk we have. So as I explained in the beginning, we have a hybrid system. There is the HC3 heat priority available, so we can switch it off, which means all the data are stored on the spinning disks, and we can move it to 11, where all the data are stored on SSDs. And when we put it something in between, then there's an algorithm behind which places the blocks or moves the blocks from SSD to the spinning disks after a time, or if they aren't used frequently. Any questions so far? Any more questions? So basically, I have shown you all the basic things we can do, or you can do, with a scale cluster. I think that's a very easy way to manage and run IT infrastructure. There's a question: can we mix different type generation of scale nodes in one cluster? Yes, that's possible, with one exception. So you can't mix the HE150 generation with the HE500 and greater systems because of the completely different architecture. Well, you can mix HE1, HE500, HE1200, HE5000, HE3000 series in one cluster. Let's also give you a nice option, let's say, for lifecycle management. Maybe you start with 3 nodes for now, and later you replace not all every 5 years everything. So maybe you start in year 4 with the first node, next year another node and another node. So for example, that you have a life cycle changing 1 node per year or so. By the way, from a licensing or from a commercial, but don't want to talk about licensing, that's more like from a commercial point of view, there is also, next to the traditional model, buying appliances for 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, also a so-called MSP pricing model available, which means you buy the hardware now and having monthly rates for using your cluster. And that's available for 36 months or 60 months, which also quite nice to don't spend that much money in front. You can spread your costs over the runtime of your scale cluster. Some more questions so far? Okay, the support covers also potential hardware issues and which level of SLA. For sure, we do that. So as I said in the beginning, there you only need to call scale computing if there is a hardware issue, which is maybe, for example, a disk is broken. You need to call in at scale and we take care, and the hardware part is covered by next business day. Hope that answered the question. By the way, a broken disk is not a critical issue in a scale cluster, because through the smart things and smart error detection, basically a disk knows early enough when it will be broken. That means we copy all the data to the other nodes, which means we will have the data completely redundant when a disk is willing to be broken, let's say. So by the way, we can lose in a cluster one of the nodes completely, and in the remaining nodes, half of the disk space, and the cluster is still running and online. Some more questions so far?
I don't see the questions, any questions. So far, it is no question. So I think, Torsten, if it will be in the future after our meeting, I collect all the question and or I can answer for it, or I will use your information from your person to help me with the answer to question.
For sure. So if there are questions upcoming later on, please feel free to send me an email or call me directly or talk to Christoph from Connect Distribution, and he will manage that you will get your answers. Or if you're interested in a personal one-to-one session, or if you see that could be an option in your portfolio and maybe there is a project upcoming, let us know. We want to help you in sizing. We have a couple of tools available for that, and we would be more than happy to help you and go together with you into your IT infrastructure projects, and let us know what you need.
Okay. As Torsten said, tak jak Torsten powiedział, będziemy bardzo szczęśliwi, jeżeli będziemy mogli razem z Państwem pójść do Waszych klientów, pokazać to rozwiązanie i zaproponować zainstalowanie i jakiś proof of concept na przykład. Dlatego zapraszamy do kontaktu ze mną, bądź też bezpośrednio z Torstenem. We both, Torsten and me, we are open to your question, to your next business opportunity. So feel free, as Torsten said, to contact with us, with Torsten or with me or with someone from Connect Distribution.
And what I forget to mention, if you want to have a test by yourself, so we have on one hand a very nice HE150 partner promotion, detailed information you will get by Christoph, and you can also get the possibility to run or to play, let's say, on a remote cluster, which is provided by Scale Computing. Just let us know. We can manage that easily and quickly for you if you want to have
of course
get the feeling by yourself. It's maybe better than just watching a demo, just playing around with the system. The only thing is we need to know.
Okay, of course. So thank you very much for the participation in our meeting. Torsten, thank you very much for your help, for your presentation, and I hope we'll see in next time with business opportunity, and we can sell our solution on the Polish market. Thank you very much one more time for the participation, and have a nice day to all of you. Thank you very much, Torsten.
Thank you.